Imagine that there's something between them. Hey, Seraphin here, and this is one of the best soft breads I've ever had. It uses a small amount of rice flour that makes a big difference. Now, while I would love to tromp onto the recipe, I think it's difficult to like something that you don't know. So here's a bit of historical background to the bread we're going to make today. At the end of the 20th century, the traditional pain de mie or Pullman bread was pretty much standardized in its method of production and relatively fixed in the list of ingredients it incorporated. For a sandwich bread, it tasted good enough for many people to be a popular choice, especially in the West. At the same time, in Japan, something else was happening. Ever since rice consumption peaked in 1962, rice was on a downward spiral, with less people eating rice every year. At this crucial moment of changing consumer appetites, with more and more people looking for alternative foods to go along with their changing lifestyles, in October 1998, a bread company called Pasco Shikishima Corporation launched their new product, Chojugu Shokubang, in the Kansai area. At the center of the philosophy of Chojugu is the idea of bringing out the natural sweetness and aroma of wheat by using only what is truly necessary. Simple ingredients without unneeded additives. The same principle underlying many well-known Western lean breads, such as baguettes and ciabatta, for example. Differing from these lean breads, though, chojugu is actually closer in texture to the steamed buns and rice that people in the Far East had been eating for generations. Chojugu was a success, and it gained immediate popularity in the Kansai area. Within a few months, it was released nationwide, becoming a runaway success in Japan. Chojugu suddenly became the top bread and established the company as one of the most successful bread companies in Japan. By 2014, the market for yudane bread was valued at more than 100 billion yen, with sales continuing to increase. Chojugu, until now, remains a top seller in its category of white bread. As for the secret to their success, well, while it might have been unknown to the general public for a time, it's a bit of an open secret now because it's simply the yudane method. By the time Chojugu Shokubang was released on the market, research on gelatinized starch had been ongoing for a pretty long time. It had already been well known to be effective, but had not been used because it was difficult to mass produce. The company seized the opportunity by being able to effectively mass produce and to commercialize it ahead of other companies. So on 16th of March 1999, a few months after their successful launch, the company registered their first yudane patent. So the ingredients and methods they used at the time were revealed to the public. Long story short, that became the yudane or Tangzhong that we know today. After that, they filed a second patent that was registered on the 12th of February 2009. In it, we see the use of rice flour as an additional ingredient for the yudane they made. And that is a game changer, which is also what we're going to do today. We're going to go straight to the recipe, and as usual, we'll cover the science after that. Now, while this bread dough was originally inspired by the chojugu shokupan, I found that it can be made into a wide variety of breads, from burger buns to anpan to regular loaves. It's a very versatile recipe that can suit all sorts of preferences. You can make nearly any kind of Asian bread with it. So let's dive in. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is make our pre-ferment. This time, we're using a Biga, not a poolish. So Biga is pretty much like a poolish in that they're both pre-ferments, but it has a lower hydration. So the water to flour is about 50%. Much lower. Alright, let's just get immediately into making it. I have here 65 grams of water. I'm going to pour it straight in. And I've got about 1 gram of instant yeast. Letting that go in as well. I'm going to add in 130 grams of flour to that immediately, bread flour. Okay, we're going to give it a quick stir with my spatula here. Just mixing it like that. It's quite dense, so we're going to have to knead it very soon. just after we get most of the flour in there. Okay, now I'm just going to take my scraper, clean off the spatula just like that, set it aside, and we're going to knead it. Compared to a Polish, a Biga does take a little more effort, but given that we're using a lot of the water for milk replacement, as well as for the Tangzhong, we've kind of have to make do with it. A Biga has its own benefits though. It's said to be able to lend strength to the dough, and it does build a lot of flavor, as long as you leave it for long enough. Although this is quite dry, it's really nothing when I compare it to when I made noodles. The hydration of noodles is like 34%, 38%, very low. All right, this is almost done, which we can tell by most of the flour is practically integrated into the little pre-ferment. I'm just gonna get all of the loose flour on the sides. Just continue kneading that for a little more. Make sure everything inside is well combined. And we're done. Okay, we're gonna leave it in this nice little ball, and now I'm going to cover it. All right, now you could leave this Biga out to fully ferment for about 2 hours at room temperature, or you could do what I'm going to do, which is put it in the fridge, let it ferment overnight, and get more flavor. So, off to the fridge. All right, so the Biga is done. We're waiting for the boiling water to heat up. Okay, so I'm pouring 115 grams of boiling water straight into this bowl. All right. And then I'm dropping in the rice flour first before adding in all of the wheat flour. I'm going to take it off the scale, and I'm going to mix all of the ingredients together. That is 15 grams of rice flour and 65 grams of wheat flour. You want to make sure to work really fast so that the water hasn't cooled down by the time the flour is mixed in. I've found that the rice flour does make the Tangzhong a little harder to mix. It's a little stiffer, probably because it contains more starch, so it absorbs the water quicker. But with a little bit of effort, it should be easy to mix in just like that. Rice starch in general has a higher gelatinization temperature than wheat starch. That's why I added in the rice flour first, and then after that the wheat flour. It also adds this really nice smell to this Tangzhong. It smells a bit like rice, which is, I quite like it personally. All right, that's about it. It looks mostly hydrated. I don't see any flour. Okay, so I'm just gonna clean off my spatula at the edge, the side, and I'm now gonna cover it and let it come to room temperature, just with this cloth here. When it comes to room temperature, I'm gonna cover it with a silicone cap and put it in the fridge along with the Biga. All right, so it's the next day. Our Biga and our Tangzhong are ready. Now we're gonna start mixing everything together. So first thing I'm gonna do is, because the Biga is quite stiff, I'm gonna scoop it up. And now I'm gonna break it into little chunks. It's gonna help it mix into the dough easier. Okay. With that done, I'm going to set this bowl aside, and now I'm going to add in the Tangzhong. It's quite cold and stiff. Just dropping it straight in, using my spatula to get all of it out. And then we add in all of the milk, 60 grams of milk, just pouring that right in. 6 grams of salt. I'm using some nice and flaky sea salt, helps add flavor. 20 grams of sugar. Okay, now before we add in the penultimate ingredient of bread flour, I'm gonna mix this first, just a little bit like this. Try to break down the Tangzhong as well as Biga. And then this is as far as the spatula can go here. I'm just gonna use my hands and just break it down like this. We don't have to do too much of this breakdown because the stand mixer will do most of the work for us, but This will help it along and also help prevent any lumps inside the dough. It's a little cold, so it's quite stiff. Just gotta keep working it for a little bit more. While with our bread recipes, it's normally the Tangzhong that's kind of difficult to mix in, and it's the main problem. But this time, it's the Biga that's the main problem because of its lower hydration compared to Polish, so we do need to break it down. Okay, that looks pretty good. So we still have a few big lumps of Biga, but that's okay. Most of it is broken down. The machine will mix it together for us later. Okay, I'm going to use a scraper, just clean off my hands, although there's not much on them. Now we're just going to add in all of the bread flour, which is 115 grams of bread flour. Just going to give that a cursory mix. So this will prevent any loose flour from flying out of the stand mixer. I like to knead it a little bit as well. This shouldn't take too long, just 1 minute or two until it comes together into a rough ball like this. Then we're going to move to the stand mixer. Right, just before this goes to the stand mixer, I'll mention that we also have 22 grams of butter left outside to soften. It's just waiting in the wings until we mix the dough for a little bit, about 1 to 2 minutes before we add the butter, and then mix it until full gluten development, which should take about 7 to 8 minutes at a medium speed. All right, so this is what the dough should look like when it's done. You can see that the bottom of the bowl is mostly clean. We've still got a bit of dough around the edges above, but that's perfectly fine. As long as the dough looks cohesive, it looks smooth. And in fact, we can just immediately test it with a window pane test. So I'm going to scoop up a little bit here. You can already see how strong it is like this. And now just stretch it out. There, this is already passing the window pane test. Pretty sure I can get it even thinner. All right, now that the dough is done with its mixing, we're going to prepare its bulk fermentation spot. I've got this nice bowl and I've got a little bit of vegetable oil. You only need a little bit to line the bowl. You really want to get up there because the dough will grow. You just want to line your hands with it. And now we're going to take it out and shape it into a round bowl. Nice and even shape. I'll just clean down the sides like this and scoop the dough out. There we go, and more, just a little bit. Okay, it's beautiful dough. Can knead it a little bit more, just getting it into that round bowl shape. This dough will still be tacky even after it's fully kneaded, but it shouldn't be extremely sticky, just like this. All right, with a bit more oil, I'm just going to pick it up now and round it out like this. Look at how shiny smooth the dough looks. All right, into the bowl it goes, and I'm gonna cover it, and I'm gonna leave it to bulk ferment until it doubles in size, which should take around 1 hour at our room temperature here. To know what it looks like when it doubles in size, I've got a neat little trick here, which is that you can push the dough up to the midway line of the bowl, and this is how tall the dough should be when it's double in size. You wanna make sure to really get in there. It's a bit slippery, it's okay. Something like this. That's how it should look. All right. I'm gonna cover it again and leave it be. Okay, this dough has doubled in size. So now it's punch down time. So I'm gonna sprinkle it with a bit of flour and just punch down like this, degassing it entirely. Look at this gigantic bubble. All right, and now I'm just gonna get it out of the bowl onto the surface. Gonna give it a little knead just to further degas it, making sure all gas bubbles are gone. All right, this looks really good. So now I'm going to turn on my scale. I'm going to weigh the whole thing and divide that by 603 grams. So that's about 100 grams each. All right. Now I'm just going to divide it with my scraper. Add that into 2, and each of these into 3. All right, now that we've divided them all into equal pieces, we're just going to pre-shape them into little round boules. So quick and easy, super simple. Just rounding them out in my palms, using a bit of flour if needed, just a little bit on the outside of the dough. And then I'll drop it down here. There you go. Okay, moving on to the next piece. Again, this is another important opportunity to degas any bubbles that you see or not. They might cause gaping holes in our bread. Okay, just a little bit of flour is more than enough. You shouldn't need too much. Okay. Okay, now that they're all pre-shaped, I'm just going to cover them with this plastic cover, just like that. All right, the dough is nice and relaxed. I'm going to set this cover aside and we're going to get to shaping them. So half of these I'm going to shape into regular burger buns, and the remaining half I'm going to shape into good old hot dog buns. Okay, I'm going to show you how to do that. Scooping up the first one here, flipping it over. All right, I'm going to degas it basically. And this is a very easy shape to make, the burger bun, right? So make sure that all the gas has been completely expelled from the dough, and I'm using a rolling pin to ensure that. Trying to keep the shape roughly circular, doesn't have to be extremely circular. It's a bit sticky. It's okay to add a little bit of flour, just a little bit of flour to the dough, as long as you make sure that it's fully degassed. And now we're just going to fold the edges into the center like this, making sure it's nice and tight. After that, we're going to turn it over and roll it, either in our palms or on the surface. There's no problem, until you get a nice and tight boule like this. It's important that it's nice and tight, and I'm going to put this on a silicone-lined baking mat. So just right here. That's one done, and we have 2 more burger buns to shape. All right. It's getting a little warm, so I am using just a tiny amount of flour to prevent sticking. Rolling this out. Really degas it. It is probably because of the climate that I have to work so hard at degassing this dough. If you live in a colder climate, you might not even have to bother beyond the first degassing. Okay, once it looks nice and tight like this, I'm just going to put it over here. Try to evenly space them out. Do remember that they will grow a little bit. You don't want them touching. So the last one will be here. The biggest reason we want to degas so often is so that we get a nice and uniform, kind of like dense crumb structure, complete opposite of like an open crumb that you'd see in an artisan bread, like sourdough. Okay, properly degassed. Fold in the edges into the center. There we go. It's nice and tight, so I'm just going to roll it out in my palms. And lovely, it's done. Okay. Now we're going to shape the remaining 3 into hot dog buns. Okay, so the initial step is roughly the same. You just flip it over. Now this is where things start to change. So after degassing it like this, I'm just going to flatten it with my palm for ease. We're just going to roll it out. We're going to try to roll it out into a kind of long rectangle. It's a little bit like how we shape shokubang, but like a mini version of it. Making sure to fully degas that. I'm going to roll this out one more time just to get it nice and long. And now I'm going to turn it over, and what I'm going to do is that I'm going to roll it up from this side. So try to do this tightly, like this. And this is our hot dog bun shape once we pinch to seal. All right. And I'm also pinching this end over here as well as this one. There are often a lot of small bubbles trapped here, so make sure to degas them properly like I did. Okay, just a bit more flour and roll it out a little bit to get it even in length if you see one part fatter than the other. But other than that, we're done. So this is our hot dog bun shape. I'm just gonna move it here, set at the bottom here, remembering that there's space for them to grow. Okay, moving on to the remaining 2. Flour the work surface a little bit, flip this over. All right, a bit of flour, just gonna degas it with my hands. It's getting warmer and warmer and the dough is fermenting faster and faster. Working against time here. Okay, nice and long. Right, pull this to the side, degas the edges. And now I'm gonna roll it up. Nice and easy. There we go. Okay. And we're just going to pinch to seal. All right. And we're going to move this to the baking tray. Okay. Okay, last one. Roll it out. And then we're going to roll it up nice. Okay. Okay, last one is done. Okay, and now that the dough has been shaped, we're going to leave them to proof for about 45 minutes to an hour until they roughly almost double in size. All right, now I'm going to cover them with this cloth and leave them to rise. After the dough is fully proofed, we're going to put them into the oven, which has been preheated to 180 degrees Celsius. And then just before these buns go into the oven, I'm going to give them a nice coating of egg wash. I'm using an egg wash made of 1 egg mixed with a tablespoon of milk. The milk is there to make the wash easier to spread, as well as add some sugar for the Maillard reaction, help the bread brown a little more. I'm brushing all sides. And then when they're all covered in egg wash, the hot dog buns are done. But I'm going to add some sesame seeds to the burger buns. We could sprinkle it all over the buns, but I'm going to do something a little different. I'll dip one end of a wooden rolling pin into the egg wash and then into the sesame seeds before pressing the end down onto the top of the bun. Not using too much pressure, we'll leave a small and neat circle of sesame seeds. You could, of course, just sprinkle it all over. Then it's time for them to go straight into the oven. We're going to bake them for about 30 minutes on top and bottom heat or until they turn fully golden brown. All right, when they're fresh out of the oven, while they're still hot, I like to brush them with some butter. This helps give them some shine, some gloss, as well as some extra flavor. Now, let's have a look at the science behind this recipe. Most of the ingredients used in this recipe follow the recipe guidelines of our previous video on shokubang, the Japanese milk bread. So we're not going to repeat the underlying decision-making process in the ingredient selection and decisions on the proper quantities for the ingredients. Instead, we're going to focus on the extra ingredient, the rice flour that we use in this recipe. We want to know its effects on the rheology of the dough and the texture and taste of the bread. From the patent, we learned that the percentage of rice flour used is between 0.1 to 20% of the wheat flour used for yudane. So in baker's percentage, if we're using yudane 20, it should then be in the range of 0.02% to 4%. The patent also mentions that the preferable range is 0.2% to 10%, baker's percentage 0.04% to 2%. In our recipe, we use up to 4.6% baker's percentage, which is slightly above the highest limit. This, I have to say, is purely my subjective preference when it comes to the taste and texture of the bread made with this recipe. After numerous experiments, I really fell in love with this higher percentage of rice flour. Maybe it has to do with me growing up eating steamed rice, so it's quite natural for me to opt for the flavors coming out of the rice flour's addition. If you find it to be too strong, you may want to follow the preferable range as mentioned in the patent. Now, if you've been watching our recent videos on Tangzhong, you know that adding Tangzhong or yudane has some negative impacts on our bread dough, mostly due to its effect of lowering gas retention and gassing power that causes the dough to end up requiring a longer proofing time. All of this eventually results in a bread with a smaller specific volume. That's why you may see some savvy bakers take the additional step of adding some vital wheat gluten to fix this shortcoming. On the rice flour side, we can also guess some of its effects on the bread by simply knowing that the quality of gluten-free rice flour bread is not as good as wheat flour bread. Rice flour bread usually has a harder and denser texture due to lower dough expansion. Now, if this were all we had to say on rice flour, then it would end here, and we wouldn't have used it at all to make our bread. But there's a lot of interesting information coming from another paper. In this paper, numerous experiments were done with 15% of gelatinized rice flour as well as rice porridge. The study confirmed that the breads containing gelatinized rice flour or rice porridge have higher dough expansion and softer texture than usual without additional ingredients such as gluten. The paper goes on to explain, and I quote literally, that the reason why that the breads containing gelatinized rice flour or rice porridge had high dough expansion might be that the gelatinization of rice flour or rice encouraged water absorption of wheat flour. And then gliadin and glutenin, which contained in wheat flour with sufficient water, formed gluten smoothly. And while gelatinized starch, by baking, complemented structure of gluten, gelatinized rice flour and rice porridge might extend and make structure which capture air bubbles. Now, although not as high as 15%, the quantity of rice flour that we use in our recipe is around 4% because we have to take into consideration the wheat flour in the Tangzhong 20 that we have incorporated into our bread dough. But the effects are quite stunning. From the flavor to the texture, this is definitely the reason why gelatinized rice flour is used in the chojugu bread. And I, for one, really appreciate the fantastic high-quality bread coming out of this minor tweak in my shokubang recipe. It gives us a bread with a softer texture, better specific volume, and more cohesiveness on top of all of the wonderful benefits of a Tangzhong or yudane bread. This is the kind of bread that I can eat on a daily basis. I was so excited that I made all these breads using this new recipe. Aren't they marvelous? Oh, one more thing before I go. Also from the paper, the study concludes that rice porridge bread showed the maximum specific volume among others. Now, that clearly calls for a new video, right? So that's it for today. Thanks for watching and bye!